Hello, it works. Everyone can hear me. Warmly welcome to D-Day, Democracy Day, here at Schweden House, the Swedish Embassy and Swedish delegation to the OSCE in Vienna. And we are extremely happy that so many of you have been able to join us here and come here today. My name is Fredrik Löjdqvist. I'm ambassador of Sweden to the OSCE, and I'm very happy to greet you. Welcome to this building with quite a long history, but I will not bore you with that now. But I'm also very happy on behalf of a number of OSCE delegations, countries who organized these Democracy Defenders events today. We will start with the Democracy Defenders seminar, which will start in a couple of minutes, and that will be followed by an award ceremony of handing out Democracy Defender Award, which will take place at around 12 o'clock. Just some practical arrangements. There are a limited number of seats here, so some of you might have to be stand, and if you see people who look more in need of a seat than yourself, maybe we can switch and so forth. This event will be live streamed. This is a transparent, open and inclusive event. And I assume also that one can watch it on YouTube or something like that afterwards. That means also that everyone who speaks should have a microphone in front of him or herself, so also those not in this room can follow these events today. As I mentioned, the Democracy Defender Award is an initiative. This is the second year we do this. The first year was last year. And it's an initiative of a number of OSCE delegations here in Vienna, in alphabetical order: Canada, Denmark, Montenegro, the Netherlands, Sweden, Switzerland, United Kingdom, and the United States. And we do this together with the OSCE delegations of Albania, Belgium, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, France, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Mongolia, Poland, Romania, and Ukraine. So you can see these are all in all 22 OSCE delegations, and representing a very wide sort of geographical range from Mongolia to Canada and United States, the whole OSCE, and from north to south. And I really want to point out that this is very much a collective effort of all these delegations mentioned here. We're happy, as I said, I'm very happy that we can host this here on the Swedish premises, but this is in no way a Swedish event, so it's a collective effort of all of us. And I think we're all facing challenges. I mean, one of the points with these events is to highlight and discuss, and not only analyze, but to find ways forward, but challenges to democracy and how can we defend democracy in these days. And I think this becomes more and more topical by the day, as we see various kinds of challenges to the democracy in the OSCE area. For the seminar, we have chosen the topic of protecting human rights, fundamental freedoms, and space for independent voices in the face of rising authoritarian populism. And I think populism is very much discussed all over the place right now, and it's blamed for everything. But here today we will try to have a deeper look to understand what is this populism, what is the character of this threat, and also ways forward how we can counter this. I think we can say without any hesitation that populism is something that all of our countries in the OSCE region are faced with. This is not something particular to small or bigger countries, to countries east or west of Vienna or north or south. This is a collective, this is a common challenge that we are challenged by. And we're very happy to have a star panel here today who will take us off in this discussion, and then of course the discussion will be open for all of you, and we very much hope for an interactive discussion. On the panel from left to right, we have Lotte Leicht from Human Rights Watch, and she will also be moderating the discussions here today. You have the long bios in the program, which I hope that all of you have got, otherwise you can get it outside. But Lotte Leicht is very well known, not least for her work with the Human Rights Watch, and publicly known from media and social media and so forth. Next to her is Edward Lucas, among many other things, senior editor at The Economist, and someone who has been covered Central and Eastern Europe for a very, very long time and has been written extensively about these things in articles, but also a number of books. And next to him is Dahan Iraq, a researcher from Turkey based currently in Strasbourg. And you've been working as a journalist and a media critic, and you are at the University of Strasbourg right now. Last but not least, to the right is Mr. Balint Jósa from Hungary, working at something called Subjective Values, and very much involved in the combating discrimination in various forms, and has been a program coordinator for the United for Intercultural Action, and has also been involved, especially also in Roma cultural and political issues. So please, Lotte will kick off the discussions in half a minute. But also just, we will go on to about 11:45, and then you are all welcome to go back outside and you will be served something to drink. And also, I think there is tea and coffee and juice for everyone who wants to grab something meanwhile to stay awake. Then we will rearrange this room, and then we will reconvene at about 12 o'clock for the award ceremony. And we are very glad to have, we will talk more about that later, the representative of Goldman's movement, Mr. Yuri Gurman, who's sitting right there, and also last year's prize winner, award winner, Alexandra Matvichuk, who will also hold a speech to Golos. But at around 12 o'clock, we will reconvene here for the award ceremony, and there will be much more about that later. And there's also, for representatives of media here, there will be an opportunity to meet the prize winner of this year, last year, any one of the panelists, and also if you can perhaps most easily come to then gather in the library at around, after the award ceremony, but maybe around 12:30, something like that. Lastly, as I mentioned several times, this is very much a collective effort of a number of delegations and ambassadorial colleagues and other colleagues in our delegations here who have made this possible, strongly engaging in democracy. But I do want, and especially on this day, make a special mention of a person without whom this would not have been possible. The one coming up with this great idea, and the one who has not seen the problems, obstacles, or hurdles of doing this, but seen all the possibilities and opportunity to do this. And this is my parting US colleague, Daniel Beer. Please stand up.
Yeah.
Who, for political changes in the US administration, is working one of his last days here in Vienna and will leave as a US ambassador to OSCE on Friday. But Dan, without you, none of this would have been possible, and you've been a great source of inspiration for all of us. So thank you very much for that. With that, I want to hand over the word to Lotte and start the seminar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. Tack så mycket. It's a pleasure to be here again in Sweden House and to welcome you all to this very important discussion, because there can be no doubt that the rise of populism poses an extraordinary danger and threat to human rights. What we are seeing is the rise of illiberal democracies. So yes, governments will be voted in by majority vote, but part of their agenda and part of the populism agenda is to undermine rights for minorities, for those that you disagree with, those that you for some reason do not like, maybe even your neighbor. And that is a challenge that we all need to stand up to and face head on. Trump has gained power in the US, and others in Europe have done the same or are now trying to do so through an extraordinary dangerous cocktail of propagating hate and making appeals to racism, xenophobia, nativism, and to lie and use untruths. This is what we will be discussing today. I hope that our panelists will not only be able to identify the problems that we are facing, but also to give in their interventions and in our discussion some of their views on how we can best take on this challenge as nations, as communities, as diplomats, as civil society, as journalists, and simply as citizens, because we are all called into action now. We know what these populists, or what this kind of populism and representing sort of the majority view over minorities can lead to. We're here in Vienna, and all of you are passing on your way to work at the Hofburg, the balcony, where Hitler greeted the masses in this very town. This is a dangerous moment, but it's also a moment where we can make a difference. And it's that positive difference that I hope that we will also be able to discuss today. So with that, I will leave now sort of 5 minutes to each panelist to give us their views and to kick off the debate. And we will start with Bahan, Iraq. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for receiving me. Thanks everyone for coming. I used to be a journalist when I was in Turkey. Now I'm a scholar. And when I was a journalist, I was a very critical journalist, and right now I will try to stay as scholarly as possible to fulfill the requirements of my new profession. And this is also actually something in common with journalism, that you depend on the facts when even you criticize. So it's not some sort of open fire. You have to depend on facts to tell your story. So it's not that different, maybe. So, while being scholar, I will try not to bore you to death, which is one of my objectives. So, since the Brexit and Donald Trump's becoming president-elect, we've been discussing a new phenomenon, a buzzword, if you will, post-truth. I have an objection to this term, because truth is by nature is a construction. It doesn't come up in the nature. You construct it, you build it based on a context. What you have is the facts. You have the facts. You put facts into a context and you build a truth. And it's so complicated that with the same set of facts, you can build more than one truth, actually. Because when the context changes, when the context you employ changes, the truth you're gonna end up with will also change. So this period, whatever we call it, post-truth period, or denial of facts, or whatever, it's not that we have no truth. We have too many truths. We have a revolving door of truths. It changes every day. One day it's something else, the other day a new thing shows up. It's the same thing in many places. It's not a cultural thing, it's not a geographical thing. I mean, it happens in the US, it happens in Turkey, it happens in Hungary, it happens in France. It certainly happened in the UK during the Brexit campaign. So we have this global situation going on, and we really ought to discuss why democracies are so vulnerable to this sort of construction of truth, and why we couldn't actually defend the facts against this new sort of construction. So this is one of the main things I'm going to discuss through the event, basically. And also, since I'm from Turkey and I know the Turkish context, I can tell you why, in a socio-political context, in a historical context, I can tell you why the Erdogan regime became so popular as a populist, conservative Islamic regime or rule in a mostly secular democratic country, and why Turkey has become a competitive authoritarian country. This is a new political science term coined by Steven Levitsky that I would like to discuss a little. So mainly through the seminar, I'm going to discuss these two main issues, post-truth and competitive authoritarianism in Turkey. And suppose, for the moment, I'm done.
Thank you very much, Dorhan. I think it is important, as you said, to put things and facts in context. But it's also important to recognize that we can't award the same attention to the notion that 1 + 1 = 3 as 1 + 1 = 2. And that we need to draw the logical also consequences based on both facts, but also real truths. I now give the floor to Balyan Yosha. You also have tough work ahead of you and to deal with in your home constituency in Hungary, of course. So you both come also with a very personal experience of what both untruths but also undermining rights means.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Greetings to everybody. So what we talk about is the rise of populism versus democracy and the unpopularity of democracy. Because what you say, I'm sorry, we are echoing a lot. I don't know what to do about it, but okay, so the issue is that you say that populists rise and rise into power. I think it's the mic itself, maybe. Okay. So in Hungary, for example, the two-third majority of the government is voted only by 40% of the people. So what I see as a problem, a huge problem with democracy, the democracy itself became unpopular. People don't want to take part in it. So if you want to talk about solutions, then my solution is go vote. That's a very important one. And the opposite power of populism is to find very simple solutions to very complicated problems. We have global problems. One of them is climate change, terrorism, economy, migration. These are all global problems. None of the nation states can solve any of them. But a populist can say, I know the solution for these problems. And for example, climate change doesn't exist. I solved the problem. It's one sentence. So, solutions of the progressive side. That's my question. So if you find solutions to these complex problems, then populists don't have a place. Because if we solve climate change, like in theory, then saying climate change doesn't exist won't become anymore a power. It's off. What I see, and that's what happened in the east of Vienna, is that the immune system of democracy was not strong enough to withhold populists. Because in Hungary, the democracy was 20 years old, and we didn't have really the institutions. And slowly, the authoritarian, illiberal state was born not overnight. It did not happen like it will happen maybe in the United States in 2 days, because we had a strong functioning democracy which slowly shifted with every 2-3 months with a new solution against Democrats. It did not happen overnight. So what you need to do, and what everybody has to do in order to defend democracy, is take part in it. Because every time the government faced strong opposition from the people, they saw not just 100 people like me, who are always there with their signs and activists, but they saw masses, then they always withdraw. They withdraw in several cases, and they said, okay, we don't want to push against our people. That doesn't work. So please be Democrats. Please go to rallies. Please take part in it. And then it won't happen to you too, how it happened to us.
A very important message also, that democracy is not just about the ballot. It's not just about voting in a government. It's about participation. And it's also about descending and being able to do so. So I think what you are saying is also important. The common basis is, namely, basic human rights. We can argue about policies, we can argue about ideas, about even problems and the solution to them. But we need to do it on the basis of a common understanding that we all have equal rights, including free expression and so on. Well, there'll be much more to say about this, and we're looking forward to hearing from you again. Edward Lucas, you've been writing a lot about this, and you've been very active also on social media about the challenges that we're facing. We're keen to have your take now.
Thanks, Lottie. And first of all, I just want to thank Frederick and also the Montenegrin delegation for helping me get here, and for the UK delegation for hosting me. And it's great to be here. I was looking at the pieces that I was writing 10 years ago, and it's very interesting. We then, if we'd been meeting 10 years ago, we'd been worried about Central Asia, Belarus, Transnistria, and in our own space, problems that basically would be on the margins of society, things like Roma inclusion and so on. But there was an air of self-satisfaction, which makes me now think we were actually living on borrowed time. We just didn't realize it. And I think what's really happened is that the front line of human rights has moved from the margins to the mainstream. We are now fighting battles in London and Berlin and Washington, D.C. and Vienna that we used to think we were fighting in faraway places or faraway parts of our society. And I think that we have to approach this with some humility. It's no good just saying, why are people being so horrid to us? Why do people not believe in our causes anymore? We have to try and analyze both how that shifted and also what our opponents are doing. And I think that the fundamental victory we won in 1989 was the idea that contestability was entrenched everywhere. That if something happened you didn't like, you could tackle it through the election process, you could tackle it through a free media, you could tackle it through the legal system, you could use NGOs, you could have public protests on the streets, and there was international pressure. And all those things had triumphed in 1989. We'd seen them all at work in different ways. And we thought those are going to work forever. And actually, people, whether it's Putin or Erdogan or Viktor Orban, have gone around and they've plugged all those gaps. So the election system doesn't really work anymore because you can't get onto the ballot, or there's so much money in politics you can't compete. The media has been hollowed out financially because of the changing business models, and the public doesn't really, and new technology has changed things, and you can do fake news in a way that was never possible. The legal system may not work so well because the judges may be under political control. The whole idea of NGOs has been delegitimized, with people saying this is inostroeni agenti, foreign agents, but these are people who can't get on in real politics, and so they get some money and try and make a nuisance of themselves. Public protest is more difficult. We have laws constraining that. And international pressure, which was perhaps the last big thing we had, well, that's going to change too. We are not going to have, under the Trump administration, the kind of automatic, critics would say, knee-jerk, we would say, very welcome support that we used to have from the American administration. So all that's changed. Now, And I think we have to then look at what are our opponents trying to do. There's this state-building agenda. They feel that the most important thing is to build the power of the state. That this has a very important aspect. That there are huge historical wrongs that need to be corrected. The last 25 years, as President Trump would say, have been a disaster, or as Kaczynski would say, that the whole post-communist transition went wrong. Orban would argue that post-communism went off in the wrong direction, and so on. And that you therefore have to go from a kind of majoritarian solution where the majority is right, and because it's the majority, it has democratic legitimacy, and you don't need to publish your tax returns because the people voted for you. So this idea of the majoritarian mandate has taken on a huge extra weight. And finally, the idea of that the other is now not just part of the system but different, but is outside the system. So if you are opposition, it very much in Russian, opoziция has a very different connotation. It's something that is not systemic. It's something that's sort of basically outside and bad. And this is now happening everywhere, that if you aren't with the team, you're against the team. How do we deal with that? We've got to try and recover some of the trust and legitimacy that we've lost in public eyes, and that's difficult. People are very skeptical about people who talk for a living, which is what we basically have been doing in the human rights community. So I think that one way we get back legitimacy is by more doing and less talking. We need to engage on the questions that particularly concern voters. I think people may be very skeptical about the human rights agenda or so on, but they're still consumers. They still get annoyed if they buy stuff and it doesn't work, if they're being ripped off. And I think we may need to shift or widen our focus a bit in the human rights community towards very practical issues of workplace rights and consumer rights and so on, which directly engage with the things that people mind about. I think we need to be more self-critical. I think we need to reckon we actually blew it. We inherited an enormous moral mandate in 1989, and we've kind of frittered it away, and we need to take a hard look at ourselves and say, why is it that people don't like people like us anymore? They don't vote for people like us anymore. What did we do wrong? We need to be a lot more transparent about what we do. I think the idea of transparency on funding is tremendously important. I particularly think that's important in the think tank world. It's very interesting. If you Google NGO transparency, you get lots of NGOs that are dedicated to transparency. It's very hard to find anyone who deals with the transparency of NGOs, and I think we need to do a better job on that. And we need to be patient. We've been here before. We had decades when we were seen as, particularly in this part of the world, to the east and to the south, as kind of futile people. They used to say jackals howling on the sidelines. And I've been going back and looking at some of the communist propaganda that I used to deal with when I was a Cold Warrior back in the 80s, and the sort of things that the Czechoslovak and Polish and Soviet press used to say about people like us back then. And it was pretty demoralizing sometimes. It was a very hard uphill struggle, but we won then, and I think we can win again. And I just want to take issue finally with this idea. When people say we're in the post-truth world, to me that's like saying we're in a post-maths world. Maths is there whether people, or math if you're American, is there whether people study it or not. Truth is still there too, even though it may be covered by clouds in some parts of the world.
Thank you so much, Ed. That was, again, an extraordinary depressing run-through of the challenges that we're faced with, but I think a very somber one. How would you respond then to the notion that we are spending an awful lot of time, particularly you as journalists, in covering and maybe responding to the untruths, to the demagogues, and they are setting the agenda of the debate, as well as then to your notion that we need to do positive storytelling. We need to also show the good examples and the very practical examples of how problems are solved. How do you balance that challenge?
I mean, first of all, in the commercial media, which I work for, we have to make a profit. And I could assign all my reporters and editors at The Economist to doing rebuttal of disinformation, and the readers would think that's very interesting, and then they'd cancel their subscription. So we have to keep on doing our main job is to stay in business, and we should, and you know, in the private media that's not to be taken for granted. I think we're learning a lot about how to deal with fake news. This is in its new incarnation. It caught us a bit by surprise. We were quite good at dealing with Soviet disinformation during the Cold War. My country and others, I think, mistakenly wound up those capabilities in the 90s, thinking it was game over. And we're recreating them now, and there's a lot we can do. I think simple rebuttal and myth-busting works well in a narrow part of the media elite. People who trade in facts anyway are quite interested to see, yes, this is why the Russian conspiracy theory about MH17 isn't true. But that doesn't really resonate with the masses. Most people will just say, this seems quite controversial. There seem to be various sides to this story, and how do I know who shot down the plane? So I think we can get too much caught up in the weeds of myth-busting and rebuttal. What's much better, I think, is to attack the messenger rather than attack the message. And so there's very interesting work going on at the moment with Google and Facebook and Twitter and other of the big media companies about whether you can warn people that they're going to a fake news site. Because you can do this with algorithms. You can take using artificial intelligence, you can measure. This site calls itself DC News or DC Leaks. Okay, does it have a street address? Does that street address check out? Are there any named individuals who work for it? Do those names actually add up? Are they all called John Doe or Jane Doe, or are they real people? Have they published anywhere else? Does this website ever publish a correction or an apology? And you can automate this, and you can do it very quickly, and you can then create scores and say, this is a real website. It has real news. We may not like all the news that's on it, but it's basically real. And you can give that a rating. You can have it a red, yellow, or green badge, and that can come up on your browser, or you can give it a percentage score. But equally, you can say, this, just as we warn you, this site may put malware on your computer, and Google will warn you. It'll say, you're going to a site that may infect your computer. Well, we are now working right now on doing the same on that for news. That doesn't mean people won't go there. We can't ban them from going there. But at least they can see that this is a site which has got no real people working for it, never published a correction or an apology, and is not linked to by any reputable news site. And that gives some quite powerful tools. So I think there's plenty we can do, but we are, well, the bad guys are several laps ahead of us right now, but we're catching up very fast.
Those are indeed needed, both measures, but also urgent ones, I think, in terms of catching up, because as you said, we've been caught, maybe being a bit naive and definitely being far too slow in catching up with the fake news and the notions. Valiant, you raised the issue of both the need to be patient, but also to respect rights and be good Democrats by being active. How do you see the core challenge in terms of populism when and I think we have to agree that what is popular is not always right. I mean, that's the core of populism, but what is right is not always popular either. So how do you see us go forward in terms of engaging citizens that have bailed out and said, look, I'm casting my vote, I need a strong leader, and the leader will take care of me and my enemies as I see them, and that convinces me, and let's just move forward. We have majority, we are entitled to do what we want. How do you respond to that in terms of saying, be patient, respect rights, let's move forward?
So I think it's a complicated question because I think not so many people have found the answer yet. What I can see in Hungary, what worked really well is actually humor. So the only thing that works against a tyrant is to make fun of it. Because people still have humor. regardless of how much they take part in politics. And I believe that a new generation of democratic parties are needed. I see that, for example, in France, we are worried about the next presidential election, but we also think that probably the conservative and the socialist voters will, in the second round, go and vote together against, let's call the anti-elite. And we believe that this is kind of an immune system of democracy. Yes, right. But the problem is that none of these big institutionalized parties can really move masses of society. They are unpopular. Like, people want to switch the channel already. So that's why they vote against them. They don't vote for something, they vote against those who they are bored of. So I believe that also internally, every democratic party needs to go through a self-assessment and think of, okay, what we did before is not working anymore. Why? And this question is not answered. It's really not answered by anyone. And patience, yes, patience. I'm a little bit worried about patience because I believe that in '38 there was a lot of German NGO members who said, don't worry, Hitler is coming and maybe he's going. So it's not always the best solution for these times. But what I believe is that we need new strategies, and political parties have to come up with it, and people, NGOs, have an influence, and we should kind of impregnate, I would say, with progressive ideas, these political parties. So we have to make new alliances also. And if you think about media, the biggest issue with media, at least in Hungary, is that there is too much sources of media. So now it's very difficult to pick your channel. It's like the abundance of news. So in order to make that kind of clearer, we really need to make alliance with all the sectors that are working for us and make it into one sort of package, which says we are the media who tells truth, we are the parties who are progressive, and we are the NGOs who are on the standpoint of human rights. And we together have a message. And this individually does not work anymore. So we have to do something new, totally new.
Dahan, in Turkey, that has been, that has been experienced some of the most horrific terrorist attacks over the past years. Democracy and liberal democracy is rapidly sort of declining, and the checks and balances in society are being removed. There's no time for patience in Turkey if we're going to save both rights and core rule of law guarantees. So how do you see the challenges in Turkey in this regard, and what can be done? Because the country is moving very, very fast away from respect for rights, but also from the checks and balances that could possibly save the country from itself.
Well, that's an overwhelming question. But if you will, I would like to weigh in Edward Lucas's comments, proposition on detecting fake news websites. With all due respect, I believe that such a system would end up with a major disaster, since sites like InfoWars or Breitbart could get the green light instantly, and independent whistleblowing blogs would get the green light, and in many countries fake news are spread by regimes through mainstream media, which would instantly get green light, and the critical independent media would get the red light, so it wouldn't work. And also letting such a decision in the hands of a huge business conglomerate like Google would be a major issue regarding democracy, since the current algorithms of Google qualifying news sites are already in too much favor of mainstream sites. For example, if I write the same story and if you publish the same story at The Economist, and even if you copied my whole story, you would end up in Google News and I wouldn't. And probably I would be flagged as, for plagiarism, because you have a much nicer let's say, track record. You have an address and everything, and I write at home. So I don't see it as a viable solution to any of our problems, but it would deepen our problems in a catastrophic way. So while we are talking about catastrophes, let's talk about a little bit about Turkey. That's a good transition. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about your own country. I mean, 15 years ago, who would think Turkey would end up this way? We were so eager to become a member of the European Union, and I remember myself as a student when I was in France, when the first enlargement period took place in 2004, and I felt a little bit grim because Turkey was not that different from many other countries like Romania or Bulgaria, but today I cannot even imagine that Turkey would become the member of European Union. It has become such a nightmare. But we have to keep our cool and try to analyze why it happened this way. So in my introduction, I mentioned a little bit the difference between truth and facts. And fruits are constructions of facts within a context. So in Turkey, since the very beginning, since the emergence of modern Turkey, we are really vulnerable to truth construction. On a number of issues, we have some facts, and we take some of them, we put in different contexts, and we kind of produce our own facts. Like in Cyprus issue, like in Kurdish issue, and notably in the Armenian genocide issue. We create our own truth based on some facts, not all of them. We discard some of the facts that we don't really like. We build our own truth, and we believe in it. So we are not really unfamiliar to constructed truths, but we are kind of prone to them. So in Turkey at the moment, what is happening is still construction of many, many, many truths each day for a number of reasons to address a number of issues. For example, today President Erdogan just came up with a new explanation why the economy is in such a bad shape these days. And he accused the middlemen in food markets to raise the prices. So yesterday we didn't have such an issue. Yesterday the middlemen in food markets weren't accused by the president. Like last year, we, as scholars who signed a peace petition, we suddenly became traitors and spies of foreign governments and terrorists and such in one day. So the media, the pro-government media, they just, they are in charge of writing a backstory of any new fruit fresh out of the oven that day. So this day, tomorrow, there will be some stories about middlemen in food markets, like collaborating with the currency lobby, etc. So it's hard. But why are we so vulnerable to these? The problem is in populist rules, the facts are replaced by emotions and identities, mostly by underrepresented identities. Especially in Turkish and in American examples, underrepresented identities is a huge deal. In Turkey, also in Hungary, probably, because the poor, the less educated, rural society in Turkey is mostly migrated to urban areas, but still it conserves the same values. These people are underrepresented. They're not really, they haven't been included into democracy other than going and voting. There are areas which haven't been democratized, like education, or even basic services that a government should provide. They are not fully democratized. When you are in Istanbul, when you come from a middle or upper class upbringing, you have more chance in life than someone in Anatolia. The same thing pretty much in the US actually. If a person I don't know, in the Midwest or in the South feels less represented than someone in Bay Area, in San Francisco, in LA, or on the East Coast, Boston or New York, that's an issue that you have to address. And if you don't address to this issue, if you don't just create a democracy where common values can be shared by anyone, then somebody else preys on it. And the situation in Turkey and in the US is exactly that. So we had an underrepresented majority who has a great deal of social capital, mostly organized in mosques or township associations, because there's a huge, I have to briefly tell you about this phenomenon because it's quite very, very briefly, but it's so important in Turkish context. You know, there's a lot of migration from rural areas to urban areas in Turkey. So this happens within a network. If you are from B and you go to Istanbul or wherever, you find other people from B and you receive help. Normally this help should be given to you by the government. But since there is no such agency in between, those agencies create themselves, and there you go, township associations, people from B association, people from C association. These associations were vital in Erdogan's rising to power. So actually the problem is the populist movements address to what governments and democracies failed to address. And if we have to go back, roll back and fix it, we have to first fix those problems. All social facts, like believing in fake news, can be only fixed by not finding the culprits, but finding the problem and fixing it. For example, for the last word, our problem about fake news, it's not the production of fake news, but it's the existence of hundreds of thousands of people who tend to believe in fake news. Even if we eliminate all the fake news producers, there will be lies. There has always been lies, and we should find why people tend to believe in them. Thanks.
Thank you. And of course, in Turkey, all of that happens also in a time where then the real news and criticism is being cracked down and silenced in a way that we haven't seen for a long time. And that at least gives me some solace in that it is important, and it is also important for those in power. And for that reason, they see the necessity to crack down on it. Edward, you quickly want to...
And first of all, I think the humour point is very important, and I'm encouraging Radio Liberty to start a weekly Radio Yerevan programme of jokes about everything, with listeners sending in their anecdoti, because although Russians have lost their freedom, they certainly haven't lost their sense of humour. And I think absolutely, the attacking the pomposity and self-interestedness of the ruling elites is a very good idea in all countries. I think with fake news, you've got to separate out what you... There's different strands to this. I don't like InfoWars, but Alex Jones is a real person. You know, he exists, the site exists, they have a business model. You may not like what they say, and some of it is nonsense. But there's a difference between that and a completely anonymous site like USA Politics Today, which is pretty, we think is run by, purely run by Russian intelligence. And I think you can't, you have to just help, we as media professionals, or the algorithms that we write, can very quickly categorize sites. And that is not a silver bullet, but it's a way of helping the user of the internet make sense of what they see. And if you say, this site is anonymous, well, that's one strike against it. It's never, Alex Jones, as far as I know, has never published an apology or a correction. Well, that's useful. That's a Breitbart also never does. Other kind of mainstream outlets do it obsessively. These are useful bits of information. You can't, and they're stuff that you can do on behalf of everybody and provide it. So I don't think this is giving too much power to Google and to Twitter and Facebook. It's something we can encourage them to do on our behalf. And I don't think at all that your independent writing from home blogger is going to be disadvantaged by this. They can say, I'm an identifiable person. If you have a comment, or I publish comments, or I publish corrections, here they are. If I've got something wrong, tell me about it. And you will meet, you can meet very high standards as an individual, which these big bad sites would struggle to do.
Thank you. I will now open up for questions, and I think what we will do is to take like 3 or 4 and then go back to the panel. So please introduce yourself, and you'll be given a microphone. Yep.
Thank you very much. My name is Philip McDonough. I'm the Irish ambassador.
Please speak up.
It's on.
It's on.
Just speak into it.
Okay, I'll give you mine.
Thank you. I'm the Irish ambassador. I would be tempted to turn to the question of humour because all the best political jokes are from Hungary, but instead I'd like to address myself to Edward. And I wonder whether I could characterise your approach as saying that the liberal and human rights tradition needs to be reappropriated in some way through deepening. And in that context, I just might mention a couple of things I picked up from what you said. One was that we need a sense of history. Within the OSCE, the other day we had a wonderful speech from our American colleague, Dan, and he had a phrase about a progressive emancipation. And people probably nowadays don't feel that we're making progress, or at least in our democracies, many of them don't feel that. So history is one issue. And then you also spoke interestingly about how human rights shouldn't seem to be an elite concern, but somehow we have to show the mainstream why human rights makes a difference to everyone. And you gave 1 or 2 examples, but I wonder, could you elaborate on that? And in that context, I just make 2 suggestions. In our current situation in Europe, can we talk about human rights without in some way touching on migration? I'm not saying the solution is simple, but there is obviously a human rights angle, and this connects us to the history question. We have to be connected with what's most real. And then my other question, it springs from a very fine piece in The Economist a few days ago about Martin McGuinness in Northern Ireland. I don't have to say very much about the background there, but it was a piece full of sympathetic understanding of the journey that he's made. And so my second suggestion is about the whole question of religion and secularism, and whether there's a need to somewhat reimagine all of that in the hope that some religious voices could actually become important partners in this project.
Thank you very much. My name is Per Nyholm, a Danish journalist. I was just wondering, are we really hitting the head of the nail here? We are sitting, a nice group, very democratic, very liberal, and we are worried, and for excellent reasons we are worried, and I think we should be worried. But I didn't, for a single moment, hear the word of unemployment. I think this is the basic material problem that we have within our democracies for the moment. I don't know how to address that problem myself, but I would like to say something within the historical term of these things. 400-500 years ago, we had the age of enlightenment coming upon us. Democracy followed. We have now been sort of more or less democratic within the last, say, 150 years. Maybe democracy is drawing towards an end, as also earlier political systems were being superfluous, or were becoming superfluous. I think unemployment here plays an important role. We have arrived, I would say, with the Nobel Prize winner Vargas Llosa, we have arrived in the society of entertainment. People are probably now, they want to be entertained, basically. Our educational standards are actually falling because we are concentrating too much on economy and too little on culture and on information. I think we have a serious problem there. But the majority of our people are maybe not so interested in politics anymore. They are interested in making their money and being entertained. And they are being entertained by these popular and authoritarian forces. The entertainment, of course, being that the liberals are being bashed. I wonder if the panel could maybe discuss that a little bit. Thank you very much.
Yuri Gurman, representing the Voice movement in Russia.
Вот слушая эту дискуссию, вспомнил, так сказать, да, ну, неизвестные слова из саги о Гарри Поттере, которые читаю вместе со своими детьми.
Following the discussion, I recalled the words from Harry Potter, a book that I've been reading with my children.
Профессор
McGonagall.
Дамблдор в этой саге говорил о том, что самое сложное выбрать между тем, что, или самое трудное выбрать между тем, что легко, и тем, что правильно.
As you remember, the professor in that book said that the most difficult challenge is to select between what is true and what is right.
Вот, как мне кажется, как раз успех популизма лежит именно в том, что делается выбор в плоскости в том, что легко.
And I believe that the success of populism is that the decision is taken in favor of what is easy and not what is right.
К сожалению, на собственном опыте, то, что происходит в России, мы видим, что сегодняшняя самая большая проблема в общественном сознании – это утрачиваются понятия, что правильно.
And the biggest challenge we see in the context of Russia is that people are losing the sense of what is right.
Люди да, в общественном сознании понимают, что есть, что такое хорошо и что такое плохо.
People do understand in their minds what is good and what is bad.
Особенно это видно, так сказать, да, то, что происходит в молодежной среде.
And this is particularly visible among the young people.
В этом смысле я соглашусь с датским коллегой, который говорил о том, что проблемы здесь лежат и в области образования, и в области культуры.
And in this context, I agree with what our Dutch colleague said, that we have a problem here in the context of education.
И мне кажется, что еще один важный аспект который позволил бы преодолевать эту проблему. Это обращение внимания на все нарастающие тенденции патернализма.
And another way to address this problem is to pay more attention to the growing problem of paternalism.
Поскольку в большинстве своем обыватель хотел бы, чтобы за него решались все проблемы, и это как раз тот самый легкий путь.
In most cases, the man in the street wants problems to be resolved for him or her. And this is, in fact, what I was talking about, saying that people are seeking an easy way out.
И, ну, во всяком случае, для российского общества мы видим преодоление, так сказать, да, или изменение ситуации в безусловном развитии институтов местного самоуправления.
And in the Russian context, we believe that one way to address this problem is to promote and develop the institution of local self-government.
Потому что только когда на местном уровне граждане участвуют в решении собственных проблем, у них приходит реальное понимание того, как принимаются решения, как происходят общественные процессы.
Because only when people get engaged at the local level, they develop an understanding what kind of issues exist at the local level and how they should be addressed.
И они становятся реальными участниками этого процесса самоорганизации, и от этого чувствуют на самих себе изменение среды, в которой проживают.
And then they get involved in the process of self-organizing, and they then see themselves how the issues are addressed and how this impacts their lives.
И только в таком контексте понятие прав человека, понятие демократии, честных, свободных выборов становится не каким-то абстрактным явлением, а реальной частью жизни.
And in this context, such issues as human rights, democracy, free and fair elections become not some abstract construct that was mentioned earlier, but a reality.
Да, мне кажется, что вот именно этому контексту следует уделять большее внимание, в том числе реально.
And I believe that this is an aspect that we should pay more attention to, including in real politics. Thank you.
One more question we'll take, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Thank you very much. Sean McLeod, I'm UK Ambassador to the OSCE. A difficult question maybe, but so a simple question with a difficult answer. If the success of populists lies in their offering easy solutions or promising easy solutions to questions for which they have no responsibility for tackling, or in allowing people to avoid individual responsibility, what do you foresee happening when populists, more populists are in positions of authority and fail to deliver solutions for these problems?
We'll start from, I think we will start actually from this end, and then all panelists, there were a lot of questions there for all of you. Please be brief so we can take another round.
Yes, I try. So about unemployment, I fear that there is unemployment is also a symptom, because we have also tax evasion, we have also robotics coming in, we have new age economy, shared economy, because bread and breakfast, hotels they don't require any personnel. And we have lack of education in that sense, that education is educating people for the 19th century, while we live in the 21st. So these are really, really huge fundamental problems that create unemployment, of course. But I would see that also the youth, the new generation, is now kind of less immune, but also even more vulnerable at the same time to populist narrative. Because through modern technology, they can access all sorts of news. So they can also combine efforts, they can communicate with each other on a global level, and then you can see this happening when there is anything happening on the world, youth knows about it first, so like really, really fast. So there is an opportunity, but the threat is that as long as they don't get educated, that this can be changed, they don't see it happening because they are kind of closed out from taking part in democracy, politics, economy, then they can fall into the trap of, again, populism. So in Hungary, for example, the youth is voting super progressive green and ultra right-wing right. So this is the two main, most popular themes. So the most progressive and the most radical. And one thing which I really need to address always, that we consider in this room a lot of people bad guys, but they consider us bad guys. There is no bad guys. Everybody has an opinion on subjects, and everybody sees in the mirror the most beautiful patriotic hero, regardless that when he goes out, he's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. It doesn't mean that what they believe in is fundamentally wrong. It comes from very good emotions, proud, love. These are the most important emotions behind being patriotic. And then, if you don't have these answers and you don't have enough information, this can turn you into something that we think morally wrong. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong from the very first point on. So that's the two things I wanted to say, and then I give the floor.
Well, for starters, the populists hate the facts. That's a fact. So in Turkey, when I have a look, the professions who are most under risks are journalists, lawyers, scholars, and also if you're a politician critic of the government from a minority. So what's the common point? They state a fact that the populist regime tries to ignore. So we know the kryptonite. The kryptonite is the fact. But we should also take into account the fact that the current setting with the populists is not a debate, it's a shouting match. So it's a really fruitless effort to tell hundreds of thousands of people the virtues of facts instead of believing in some emotional blabber. It's almost impossible to do. And I don't want to be pessimistic, but to my knowledge, there is no populist regime that could be tackled unless there's a huge disaster. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to wait for them to have a crash landing? Well, maybe I'm not asking this question because I have an answer. I ask this question because it's a question to ask. We have to find an answer. How we can salvage our democracies before it gets a crash landing. In this shouting match and without ending up in prison. I mean, yeah, humor is a great tool, but humor also may get you in prison. In Turkey, there are people who criticize Erdogan, like former singer Atilla Taş, who ended up in prison for the last 200 days. He was a very funny character on Twitter, and the worst part of ending up in prison is people eventually forget about you if you are not famous enough. So it's a very tricky question. I wish I had an answer, but I have a question, which is the second best thing to an answer, I guess.
I think there's a difference between populism and authoritarian populism. The populism is there's an easy answer. Authoritarian populism is there aren't any other answers, and we're not going to allow anyone to come up with them. And I think there are plenty of examples of populist parties winning power and then falling out of power. In this country, the Freedom Party did very well, then it did badly again, now it's doing well again, but we see Podemos in Spain was doing well, now its tide is falling, Syriza in Greece. So I'm not yeah, I think the danger is that our political system is vulnerable in two ways that we perhaps didn't think about enough in '89 when we just transplanted the old Westminster model of mass political parties with mass memberships that fight elections and then form governments. And there are two vulnerabilities. One is to money, that they can be bought, and if they're rich, they can buy votes and buy power, and that kind of the way wealth and power go back and forwards into each other. And secondly, the way in which parties state capture, that once a party wins, it just suborns all the independent institutions, makes it hard to be dislodged. But I think your point about entertainment, bread and circuses was a problem in the Roman Republic. And we've always seen leaders trying to distract the public, if not voters, with entertainment. And it works up to a point, but you can't entertain your way out of bad public services. You can't entertain your way out of shoddy goods and being ripped off as a consumer. You can't entertain your way out of being badly treated at work. And those, I think you are absolutely right. I really totally agree with you that the absolute basis for human rights is people's daily experience. And that if they feel that they are being badly treated in the place where they live, in the place where they work, in the shops where they buy stuff. We see this in China right now. The biggest human rights movement in China right now is the consumer movement. People are absolutely fed up with being poisoned with stuff that they buy. And we need to think about that. And that gets on to finally your question about broadening the focus and deepening the focus. That I think we have been, over the last 25 years, too indulgent of our own interests, this kind of left liberal secular elite interests. And we've sprayed money at things that we really care about. And they're all good things, I'm not against them. But I was looking the other day about why is George Soros so unpopular? Because in my world, Soros is a saint and a genius, and he saved an entire generation of East European intellectuals from destitution after the fall of communism by paying them to translate Plato into Lithuanian and all these kind of very good things. So I did a lot of work talking to people in Law and Justice and in Fidesz and other about why don't you like Soros? And it's part that he's kind of rich and foreign and Jewish and all these sort of... Yeah, at the beginning. But what is it they don't like about him now? And one guy who I won't reveal the country, but he said, if you went to Soros and said, I want to do an oral history project about Jewish feminists in the 1930s, then money would just spray at you, and it would be great. So I'm not against doing this. He said, if you wanted to do a project about anti-communist partisans in the 1950s, it was kind of, yeah, well, maybe, and you either wouldn't get a grant, it wouldn't be such a big grant. So I think we have there's a perception among the people who don't like us that we don't play fair. We indulge in our own preoccupations, and we're not interested in questions of religion. We're not interested in questions of nation and nation building. We're not interested in patriotism. We're not interested in what they see as the real history of the country. And I think we have to listen to that. We have to say, we have to look in the mirror and say, did we spend the last 25 years riding our own hobby horses, possibly to the exclusion of other people's hobby horses, and that's given them some kind of public legitimacy in their attack on us.
We'll take one more round and hopefully 4 more questions. I'll give up the microphone. There's questions in the back.
Well, my name is Rowena Möhring. I'm a journalist and I'm a representative of the NGO Reporters Without Borders, defending freedom of the media. I would like to come back to the issue of education. I think that's very important. And we don't have to think just only on Hungary or Poland or now Turkey, but to the other countries which are still a bit more democratic than others. As long as we don't care for the kids in the school and teach them how, for instance, read media or how to use media or what's about hate postings, it's very easy to influence the population because kids are kids and want they're adults and to believe in what they learn to. So I think we should care for our education of our kids. We have to develop new programs in the sense of free media, in the sense of independent media as well. And so that's, I think one way to save society from populism. It's very difficult, and we know we got populistic movements already in Austria, in Germany, in, well, Holland, in the Netherlands. So we know the problem all over the world. To do something against it is to act, and we have to start with the kids, and I think that's one of the main problems and main issues we have to think about.
Hello. I think I'll stand up so you see me. My name is Jonas Norling. I'm the deputy head of the Swedish Embassy and the mission to the UN. First of all, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Frederick and all the OSCE colleagues and everyone else taking part of this project and making this happen. This is an extremely interesting discussion, not only for people working with the OSCE, but also for us working with, generally with political and economic issues. I'd like to ask a question. It's been touched upon already, of course, but I'd like the panel maybe to maybe revisit the best approach, if there is one, for established parties, mainstream parties, in dealing with the rise of populism. It's not maybe an easy one. One strategy seems to be that try to have as little as possible to do with populist representatives, and if necessary, join forces over the divide between socialists and conservatives in order to keep populists out of power. The French presidential election was referred to. We also see, for instance, here in Austria, there's a pretty long tradition of broad coalitions between conservatives and social democrats, making it possible to obtain majorities for those kind of governments. But at the same time, we seem to be observing how populists outside power are day by day growing in force, at least if you're looking at the opinion polls. And in the Austrian case, you all know that the FPÖ is between 30 and 35% in opinion polls, being solidly, in that way of counting, the biggest party. So one might wonder what will happen by the next election. So my question is, is it a winning strategy to keep on sort of excluding the populists for every good reasons that we've been talking about, or might it be more pragmatic to involve these parties and in thus demystifying them, making them show that they don't really have solutions and that they will probably then lose popular support when that is revealed? That would be my question. Thank you very much.
Karl-Henrik Fredriksson, Vienna. Is this focus on fake news and on truth not really a populist solution to a much more difficult problem? Fake news is very rapidly being turned around. When Donald Trump gives his first press conference in 6 months, he accuses CNN of being fake news, the BBC of being another difficult outlet. This week, the researching editor-in-chief of Falter has been accused by politicians of representing fake news when all he does is ask relevant questions and present investigative journalism. So this is being turned around. Is it not so that propaganda is something much more than about truth and facts and fake or not fake? Is it not so that propaganda is about worldviews, about ideology, about ways of interpreting and evaluating the world around us? And if we focus so much on what to me seems to be a populist solution, namely getting the facts straight, we lose a lot of the source of the real source to a real solution of this problem.
We have room for one
Thank you very much to all the panelists. Claude Ville, the Swiss ambassador to the UN and the OSCE here in Vienna. Maybe a comment. As a diplomat, I observe populism and populist parties. They are often also strongly against a strong multilateral system. It's interesting because we said, I mean, they take the issues of global nature. We all know that the way to challenge this issue of global nature is international cooperation. And so they should be interested in having a strong international system, and they are all against a strong international system. So they are not just a threat to democracy, they are a threat of good governance of world challenges. So it is also a challenge for us as diplomats. And then how can we build safeguards in our systems so that they cannot abuse the fact that they win majority and then mismanage the governance? By history, we are blessed in Switzerland in having a perpetual coalition, guaranteed. And this is actually quite a good balance to this type of abuse. So we do have populism, and it's a concern, but it doesn't reach the highest degree of the state, thank God, because populists that go in are checked by the fact that we have a perpetual coalition built by the 4 major parties. And this is a guarantee that always you have 2 sides of the board. And so I'm not giving any lessons, but thinking about ways of governing together and not just focusing all on majority, because we can see winning the majority can be abused with all the examples we have, could be a way out.
Thank you very much. We'll now go back to the panel for short answers, and this time we'll start with you, Ed.
On the question of children, I think children are increasingly more sophisticated than adults in their consumption of information. I've got 3 children aged 23, 21 and 13. And sometimes they come to me and say, can we tell her that this is true or not? But I think we should on the whole be trying to learn from the younger consumers of media on the internet rather than lecturing them. I think they know more than we do. Secondly, I think one of the points about democracy is you sometimes lose. And you can't simply respond to losing by trying to delegitimize your opponent and say they stole the election. It can be very unpleasant, but I think it's also a good advertisement for democracy that the bad guys sometimes win. And I don't know if we have any Estonians or Latvians here, but one of the sort of paradoxes about Estonia and Latvia is that the 2 parties I mostly don't like, which is Harmony Centre in Latvia and the Centre Party in Tallinn, which are the kind of, in Estonia, which are the 2 pro-Russian parties, but they do win. They win control year after year of the 2 biggest cities. You can argue that the most important elected Russian in the world is the mayor of Riga, because he actually won a real election, which is not true of elections in Russia. And so it's actually quite a good advertisement for democracy, and you just sometimes have to just suck it up. And then finally, I think on this question of fake news, I think you can't, there's always going to be a very wide range of opinions. I have friends who believe that vaccinations are a plot by the pharmaceutical industry. I have friends who believe in homeopathy. I even have friends who believe in astrology. I find all that very upsetting. And you will always have people who believe weird stuff and they'll put it out online. But I think what you can do, as I said before, is ask, what is the process by which you are dealing with information? Are you doing apologies? Are you doing corrections? Is there a peer-reviewed study? And at least you can highlight where these are questions fundamentally of faith and where they're fundamentally questions of reason, and that at least helps other people make their mind up.
Well, I would like to start with the mainstream politics. Actually, in the current situation, I believe that mainstream media, mainstream politics has a huge role, because without Sarkozy, we wouldn't have Le Pen. Without Blair and Cameron, we wouldn't have Farage. Without Bush and Tea Party, we wouldn't have Trump. So mainstream politics wanted to open the Pandora's box, cash in some easy votes by addressing to some issues which should have been handled very delicately. But instead, especially right-wing parties, in the UK example, also the center left-wing party, they opted for exploiting the concerns of citizens to make way to populist parties, especially regarding issues like immigration, family. So we ended up, when you start to babble about abortion, LGBTIQ rights, immigration, then the owner of this very field comes along and starts talking about building a wall. It's Trump who builds the wall, but it was actually the GOP establishment who paid for the bricks. So the same thing in the UK. And in Turkey, to this day, the opposition still supports some of the ideas of Erdogan because it's nationalistic. For example, 3 days ago, 3 parties, 2 opposition and 1 ruling party, they just penalized an Armenian MP because he used the word genocide in the assembly, in the parliament, which is completely ridiculous. He has the right to say whatever he wants to say in the quorum. So even in that situation, while the presidential system that would end democracy effectively in Turkey was about to pass, opposition parties actually cooperated with the ruling party to penalize an Armenian MP, which is, you know, there is a blame actually here. There is some sort of shame that mainstream politics and also mainstream media should take its share.
Thank you. Bernard.
So about the fake news issue, so I'm not really worried about fake news as such. I'm worried about post-factual politics. So when fake news influence people and then they vote for those who say the same nonsense as they read online. And as long as there is a demand for fake news, there will be always this sort of fake news websites. And one simple story, Sputnik News wrote about United for Intercultural Action that we are sponsoring 4,000 NGOs in Europe and we are behind No Borders. We are not. Unfortunately, we cannot sponsor 4,000 NGOs in Europe, and we are also not the biggest whisperers in the ear of the EU Commission that they should liberate migration policies, that migrants come to Europe. We never do that, but we are very happy to read that in Sputnik. But 2 days later, the Hungarian government newspaper wrote the same exact thing, with the same words. So we also see that how something that is written by some lunatic with full of wrongs, facts that are completely out of air, come into mainstream politics of an elected government. So this is the problem, not alone fake news. And I believe that also, yes, youth knows how to think critically, but for example in Hungary, the 16 to 21-year-olds don't read political news at all. So they have one person who regularly reads political news, nothing. So they cannot be reached by anyone, not by socialist, progressive, or no one reaches them. And that's a problem, again, because when they read entertaining news, they might believe and follow. And they have a totally different view of reality when they live in this alternative reality of fake and post-factual news. And I agree very much with the gentleman in the back that demystifying and engaging with populists openly is the best other way. Making them funny is one way, but the other is to defeat them in public. That's something that we also lack. We lack this sort of political culture when we can debate and win arguments. We are not prepared from our own things as well. Because, as I started it with, we don't have these answers either. We don't. So that's the step number one, that we agree among us what is our answer to climate change, migration, economical threat, terrorism. When we don't have these answers, how we can go into a discussion with someone who does have answers, even though they are wrong? It's not working. One talks about history, the other about mathematics, how they can have a conclusion at the end. It's not possible. And as long as we cannot defeat them in public with arguments, with facts, with solid something, a vision, a whatnot, they will always be able to say what you say is bullshit. That's a power. And we cannot really face this without having our answers ready and pile up. We don't have any bullets, not just silver bullets we don't have any bullets. That's my problem. And that's why I'm frustrated about it. And when I see a discussion between two presidents tries to be elected, I don't see any of them with something that I would vote for. I cannot just always vote for the one that is less populist. That's not what turns me on.
Well, you know, on that note, and I would say what was expressed by everyone was that we do need positive agendas. We cannot simply respond to a negative agenda, and we cannot use all our energy and time to respond to lies. We need to ourselves also represent visions and policies to the problems that people really face and are part of their daily lives. I want to thank everyone for coming, but I want to just do it on one little note, because half a year ago, a friend of mine and a person that I had the extraordinary privilege to work with and learn from was killed in an act of pure hate that I also believe was steered by the debate. Her name was Jo Cox, and she was a Labour MP in the UK. Jo was very, very clear-eyed about the problems that we are facing and that we have been discussing here today. She was energetic also in her work on behalf of the Stay campaign in the Brexit discussion in the UK. But Jo was an extraordinary optimist. You know, she believed very strongly, and she said this in Parliament, and she said it to many of her friends, and she kept saying it. She believed very strongly that what we hold in common is far more significant than our differences and that what divide us. I want to believe that too. And I want to believe that that one thing that we hold in common and that we all need to stand up for, and we can disagree about policies, about solutions, about everything else, is the bottom line of human rights, rule of law, based on which we can have all these debates. And human rights, not just for our friends, not just for the people that we know, that we hold dear, but for everyone. And that is worth for all of us to stand up for, whatever other disagreements we have. And that, I think, is a positive agenda that we all need to see ourselves obligated to take on, head on, as individuals, as parts of families, in our communities, with business people, as journalists, as civil society organizations, as opposition members of parliament, and indeed as governments. And we need to do that at every level, because if we don't, then that very foundation, what binds us together, will also evaporate. Thank you very much for coming. And now I will give the word to Fredrik, who will tell us how the rest of the day is going to work.
Thank you. Before I come to the sort of organizational matters, I would just allow myself to make some comments on this discussion. I think this has been a great discussion. It's also filled one of the purposes of this day and that is connect the work that we, some of us here as representatives of governments in the OSCE region do in our daily work with the OSCE, and to connect that discussion with the world of NGOs, analysts, think tanks, and so outside. And I think we need to have this. We diplomats cannot just sit in the Hofburg and discuss among ourselves. And I think it's also good for non-state actors to also have this discourse and interaction with us. The OSCE is a big family, and this was organized by a number of representatives of participating states. But I'm also particularly happy to see representatives of other parts of the OSCE family here. There is a secretariat, and I saw Paul Picard. Are you there? There, Paul, you're there. We also are very privileged and happy to have the representative of the freedom of media and some of our colleagues from one of the independent OSCE institutions, Dunja Mijatovic, here, and also the deputy director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, Katarzyna, who's strategically placed in the back corner there. And very happy to you and your colleagues that you could come here. I think the matters we have discussed here today, they are a matter of concern to all of us. Human rights, democracy, rule of law, these are very, very important things in themselves, and they are challenged and they are threatened, and there's a constant battle and ongoing discussion on this. From the OSCE perspective, the OSCE is as such not a human rights organization and democracy organization, it's a security organization for security and cooperation in Europe. But there is a very direct link, and that I think what makes OSCE unique, and that's the link between security between states and within states on the one hand, and respect for democracy, human rights, and rule of law on the other hand. And this was the unique and revolutionary character of the Helsinki Final Act, which was then followed up by the Paris Charter later on. And we see how this is threatened. We see how internal repression and external aggression go hand in hand, and this is a threat to security. So these matters do not matter only in terms of all the obvious reasons, but also in terms of security. And I think my Swiss colleague has pointed out, populism is also a threat to the sort of international system and international legal order, and we have to deal it on that level. I think this is an ongoing discussion. We've deepened and we discussed some issues, but this is a discussion that will go on, and this is part of a broad ongoing discussion. As a representative of a Swedish government that has a feminist foreign policy, I would be amiss that I think some of the issues that we didn't touch upon was a little bit sort of the gender issues. We have had some quite remarkable statements of two very important men in this world only over the last days and weeks, and even yesterday there was some quite remarkable. And I think there is definitely not only in terms of migration, minorities of different kinds, but I think there's a gender aspect to this that also needs to be discussed and touched upon, and maybe that we can do in the next seminar. So now I would ask kindly everyone to leave slowly and organizedly in a nice way this room. There will be drinks and something little to chew on served outside. And then we will reconvene here at 12 o'clock for the Democracy Award Prize ceremony. But before you stand up, once again, I really want to give a warm round of applause to this star panel that was helped us here.